What up, guys? Welcome to today's podcast. Today, we are going to talk about something that's a little different than the normal stuff. We'll obviously tie it into jiu-jitsu, but from speaking with you guys, both in person, through emails, through messages online, all that stuff like that, a lot of times I get questions or messages regarding anxiety, right? And again, all of us, I remember reading a stat, I forgot what it was, but it's like it's a large number of people suffer from things, some sort of mental thing, everything from depression to anxiety to whatever, right? We all deal with stuff. We all have stuff going on. And for me, anxiety was, it's kind of my thing, right? It's the one that I deal with out of those bunches. And, the first time I had it start was when I was in my mid-20s. I remember my mother had passed away. My girlfriend of several years had left me. She just, she left, and then she called me later and told me she wasn't coming back. At the time, the gym wasn't doing financially so great. We were actually, there was a bunch of different circumstances that led us to have like a massive drop in the amount of income that was coming in. And like, we were tight. There was a couple months where we were like, this may be the end of the show. Right. And all these things were piling up, and I didn't realize it, right? And I was getting overly stressed. I remember there was this point where I started having like tightness in my chest, and I felt like something was wrong with me. I went to my doctor, who was a student of mine, and he's like going through doing all this stuff. He's like, man, it sounds like you're just really stressed. And, this is the first time I realized, oh, stress, and I actually experienced for the first time a panic attack or an anxiety attack. And I remember when I had heard people talk about those, I was like, oh, this is such bullshit, right? There's no such thing as this. So you guys are just being weak. And then I had one, and I was like, whoa, that's pretty wild, right? Like, because it's like you're completely out of control. And so that said, that was the first time I experienced it back in like 2011. And then over the time I've had different bouts with it. It comes back periodically because, at least for me, anxiety tends to be pretty sneaky. It slips in there. Then all of a sudden you realize you're ruminating about stuff, and you're like overwhelmed by things, and it sort of caught up to you. But over the years, I've gotten pretty good about dealing with it. And, we all have our own things. And I figured what I would do today is share some techniques with you guys that I've used to deal with my anxiety, to quote, tap my anxiety out, right? Again, you got to think about this, though. Just like a jiu-jitsu technique, the more practice you get, the better you get with them, right? So the techniques I'm going to share, they're not going to be silver bullets. They're going to take practice like anything else. And just like a roll in the gym, when you tap out your opponent, your partner, you're probably going to have another match or another roll afterwards, right? So you're going to deal with it again. But again, the more that you do it, the more that you practice, the better you get with it. So these have been super useful to me. And so hopefully this will be helpful to some of you guys that deal with the same thing. And so hopefully this is useful and you guys get into the podcast. And big thanks to our sponsors for helping make this podcast happen, one of which is Charlotte's Web CBD. They are one of the premier CBD companies out there in the market right now. And one of the great uses that a lot of people have experienced benefits from with CBD is both improving their sleep cycles and management of stress, right? So again, everybody's got stuff going on all the time, right? And you want to have little things to help you out. And so again, for me, I use CBD as a part of sort of an aiding or as a recovery tool, right? Aiding my recovery. And again, it's been useful for a lot of people with managing stress. And so again, as this podcast is going through, if a lot of this stuff is ringing true to you and you don't use CBD, try it out. Go to Charlotte's Web's website at charlottesweb.com. The promo code is Jiu-Jitsu20 for 20% off the order. They have both the regular tinctures and gummies and everything else. And they also have a THC-free version. So if you have to, get tested regularly, that might be an option for you. Do a little research, obviously, just to be sure, but check that out. And again, charlottesweb.com is the website. Also, thanks to our sponsor, Roll BJJ.com. I don't know when Matt is going to be releasing these, but we just got to test out the prototypes for his new shorts. So for many of I like them. I'm a fan already. So I've always been a fan of his shorts because he doesn't have like the funky Velcro that always goes out. Like they're just like I've got a pair of shorts that I got back in 2020. And I mean, I still wear them every week. I don't have a lot of pair of MMA shorts that lasted me 3 years and they still look like they're almost new, right? I mean, like obviously they have some wear and tear on them, but like the Velcro stuff, like it would always give out. And, within a couple of years, those shorts are basically ruined. But at the same time, the only thing that's bad on it is the Velcro, whereas these shorts don't have it. But anyway, he's got a new pair of short shorts. So they've gotten a little shorter. And so he's testing out some prototypes. We got to try those out. When I do my next batch of Jiu-Jitsu gear through Matt, we'll have the short shorts as an option for you guys. If you're like me and you like to do some squats and you like to have your legs go off, or also just for comfort level. I just like the way they look a little bit, both for aesthetics and for comfort. So, but again, if you guys want to check out any of Matt's stuff, he doesn't have the short shorts available yet. But if you want to check out any of his stuff, you can go to his website at epicrollbjj.com. When you go there, take a look at all the gear. I'm wearing one of his shirts right now. His shirts are comfortable, cool designs. A lot of his designs are my style, which is kind of minimalist, just a little bit, not too crazy, although he does have some stuff that's a little bit more out there. But again, check out his stuff. He's got great designs, cool stuff, high quality stuff, good customer service, and got everything from gis, rash guards to shorts and t-shirts. Check it out at epicrollbjj.com, and the promo code is Jiu-Jitsu for 15% off. And also, guys, if you want to support the podcast directly, you can do so by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Upon joining, you'll get access to an exclusive library of content, including a seminar that I recorded several years ago and a warm-up routine from Eugene. We also have a little snippet from each podcast guest that we've had on, all the black belts that we've had on, all that stuff. From us, we're basically trying to pull away from them one actionable idea that someone could use for their jiu-jitsu tomorrow. So again, you basically have a tribe of black belts inside the Patreon that then have their collective wisdom in there to share with you guys if you want to view it. Again, just one little tip from each person. And again, for me, I'm one of those people where I like reading a lot of biographies. I like reading autobiographies. I like that kind of stuff because why wouldn't I want to learn from other people's experience, right? As a coach, that's what we do. We essentially pay people to coach us, and we're learning from that person's experience rather than trying to get it all ourselves, right? And so that we understand this is a faster way. And so again, there's a lot of cool tips in there from a number of different black belts. And again, if you guys have listened to the podcast for any length of time, all the black belts we've had on, there's a tip in there from them, and you can get access to it by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And last but not least, guys, if you would like to join my email newsletter, the Chew Crew, you can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join, JOIN. You'll get access to some exclusive ebooks that I give away on how to develop a jiu-jitsu game plan and also how to break through training plateaus using just different forms of drilling. I wrote that book both in the sense of you're a coach, some ideas that you can implement, but also for a lot of you guys, I know you don't have control of your training, your students. So there are also strategies in there where even if you're just a hobbyist that trains 2 days a week, you can go in, you can utilize some of these strategies to break up some of these sticky points you're having in your game, getting through some of your plateaus, that kind of thing. And you can get it again by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join. So guys, with that said, let's jump into this podcast. This was something where I just noticed, a lot of times when I'm talking with people through videos and through messages and emails and everything else, you start to get a feel for what's going on with a lot of people. And I just noticed that a lot of people were struggling with things like worry, anxiety, rumination, which is something that a lot of us deal with. Most of us deal with at some point in time. And so again, as someone like me who has dealt with some anxiety, that tends to be the thing that gets me. I've never been hardcore depressed. I've been depressed for a short period of time after something bad happened, but I've never been like hardcore depressed. I don't want to do anything type thing.
Yeah.
I have dealt with anxiety before in different forms, and it's happened for different reasons. And so I figured I would share some ideas with you on how I've dealt with it so that this way you can hopefully have a better chance of dealing with it as well. So number one, and this is kind of a regular practice. The more I do this, the less issues I have with anxiety. And then whenever I notice that I get away from this, I have to go back to this. And that's simply meditation and breath work. So, again, the more regularly I do this, the better I feel. I usually have a 12 to 20 minute meditation session each afternoon. I like it kind of in that middle of the day. A lot of times I do training, I work, I read, do these things, and I get this point where I'm mentally fried or whatever. And I like to just kind of chill out for about, 12 to 20 minutes or so by myself. And I'll pop in some binaural beats and just do some really focused, conscious, slow breath work. Or sometimes if I'm feeling like it, I'll do some of the Wim Hof style, which is a much more sort of aggressive breath work, but at the same time, it still does the necessary thing. If you guys have ever done like 4 rounds of Wim Hof breathing after you're done, you have a definite relaxation over your body and you're just kind of there. And so a lot of times in the middle of the day, for whatever reason, just kind of getting that moment to myself to kind of clear my head, and it helps sort of center me for the rest of the day. And again, the more that I do that, the less stress and anxiety I tend to have pop up in my life.
That's interesting, because a lot of times I try to do breath work in the beginning, like in the beginning of my day in the morning.
Yeah.
I feel like when I wake up, my brain is kind of all over the place. I have all these, it's almost hard for me to kind of like focus and be more kind of deliberate about what I want to do or what I need to do. So sometimes I wake up with all these things I got to get done.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it helps me kind of like, and I'll lead into some of the next stuff that we talk about, but like, it helps me kind of almost get my brain more centered. But I like the idea of like, if you're kind of recharging yourself, that's also a great point, because sometimes we get fried and then we kind of almost muddle through the rest of the day and we're not as efficient. So maybe taking some time, almost like a recharge and reset, you can work a little maybe shorter time but get a lot more done. Great idea.
Yeah, you've been there before. We've all done that thing where we know we're not giving our best anymore, and we just keep pushing through it. This is like, it's like the it's like the idea of like no rest rounds in jiu-jitsu. I mean, sure, it sounds good, but are you really able to give it your best? Or let's say if you're lifting weights, if you don't give yourself adequate rest in between sets, can you really get the maximum effect for your muscles? Because let's say if you did, like, unless there was a reason why you're trying to do it, let's say you do your set and then you give yourself 15 seconds to rest and then you do it again, you're not going to be recovered enough. If you're going to go super heavy, you're going to need like 2 minutes plus. If you're doing a little bit more hypertrophy work, maybe minute and a half, but you're going to need a rest. And so sometimes for me, that rest in the middle of the day is helpful to kind of recharge, to get that, that break from the next set of work or whatever it is I need to do. But to your credit, for a lot of people, if you wake up in the morning and you're kind of frazzled, or you have that feeling of like, I got so much to do, taking a little bit of time out to like think about, what am I going to do today? What is most important? That can be useful. For me, what I do with this, and this, I think this is probably why I do it the way that I do, is that the night before, I typically sit down for 10 minutes and I write down, here's what I'm going to here's my plan for tomorrow. Here's what I'm going to try to do here, basically in almost a prioritized way. So this way I know exactly which things I'm going to try to hit. And my goal is typically like 3 things per day, and anything else is extra. But if I get these 3 things tomorrow, it'll be a productive day. And so as soon as I wake up out of bed, it's like, I already know what I'm going to be doing. But again, with any of these techniques that we share with you guys, obviously tailor them to you and how you work, and play around with them, because nobody's the same.
Yeah, and I agree. I will, I don't do this all the time, but I'll do a to-do list before I go to bed. I'll just write, all right, this is stuff from today that I didn't get done or I did get done. I switch over, right over the stuff that I need to get done, or I feel like my priority list. And then it helps my mind kind of like almost clear and empty a little before bed. So I'm just not thinking about all this stuff I got to get done the next morning.
For sure, because it's ready to go. It's like it's out of your brain. You don't have to think about it anymore, because it's saved on this piece of paper or your digital note planner or whatever, and you'll get to it tomorrow. So another one is exercise. So obviously there's tons of studies that have shown the benefits of exercise and its ability to help you manage stress, and I think about this too. A lot of times stress manifests its way into our body, right? You could think about that. You can have a mental stress that then has physical ramifications. And so sometimes you can't just simply think your way out of it. Sometimes you got to act your way out of it. And for me, at least, it's really hard for me to be anxious or nervous or be worrying about something, when I'm in the middle of a rolling session, when I'm in the middle of like lifting a weight or whatever it might be. And so it's something like that. And if for some reason exercise is not easily available to me, for whatever reason that might be, I'll typically do some sort of active meditation. There's different forms of this, which can be just as strenuous and exhausting as an actual like exercise session. So it kind of does the trick. But for me, a lot of times, action is a way to quell, in multiple ways, is a way to kind of quell the anxiety. And again, it's really hard for me to be anxious when I'm working out. So like going back to my mom, when I first, when I was dealing with all that stuff, and my mom was sick, one of the things that really helped out was training. It was my way of dumping out all that stress and then going back to daily life and getting back to normal.
Yeah. So that's a great point. I was dealing with some back pain for about a month. That really took me out of jiu-jitsu. And it was tough. And I was like, I wanted to make every excuse, not to be active. Well, I can't train. My back hurts. Can't do this. And fortunately, during that time, Eli, my strength conditioning coach and my nutrition coach, who is yours,
he's mine as well. Yeah.
So there's shit I could do. Like, I was like, I know that I have a workout routine and workout plan to stick to, and I have a coach that's going to expect me to get things done. Now we work together, and obviously I'm a physical therapist, so I can kind of figure out what I can and can't do. But there was things I had to modify and do, but I was getting some kind of exercise, some kind of movement when I couldn't get my daily, my weekly jiu-jitsu sessions in. So for me, it was like, I still got exercise and I still got some good exertion out. And I think that was just one of those things. If you're injured in jiu-jitsu or whatever, you can work around. Eli is another guy we talked about. He's had his major shoulder surgeries, and the dude is incredible. He's working around those things. He's able to work out with freaking just completely new shoulders. So it's one of those things that you can do it. And there's a way you can get some type of movement exercise. Like you said, even some type of active mobility or anything you can do. But I think it's really helpful. And obviously it's, if you look at the science, you know, you're releasing those hormones, those feel-good hormones, and you're getting some stress out, and you're probably going to look a little better too. So that doesn't help, or that doesn't hurt. So
yeah. And I think, like, going back to Eli for a second, you know, like, and we'll talk more about this in a minute with life experiences. I think one of the things that makes him a pretty good coach is the fact that, you know, like, for instance, if you tell him, for instance, hey man, I need to modify something because something's injured or whatever, you're never going to get a message back from him saying, you know, like, stop being a wimp, just do it. Right. But you hear people say that, like, you know, it's like this hard ass mentality, but because he had so many issues because of the genetic arthritis that he had in his shoulders and stuff, he had to work around so many things. So it made him very empathetic towards people. And like when I was talking about earlier, I had no empathy towards someone about panic attacks or anxiety attacks. And then I had one. And then I'm like, oh, hey, that's what you're going through, man. That's tough. You know? And so I think that when you have life experience, it's just on a sort of side note, you know, we'll talk about this more in a bit. It makes you a little bit better. You know, you get more life experience, and sure, it's tough to deal with, but it makes you a more empathetic person because you can kind of see what it's like to be in the other person's shoes. And I think, like, as a coaching standpoint, I think it makes you better. I know that when I started doing horse riding lessons, that made me a better coach because it got me back into this mindset of, like, why does all this work? And then when and it's a very physical thing too, right? Because it's like, okay, why do I push on the horse this way? Because the horse moves away from pressure and they do this. It's like you're thinking about it in the terms. So then I found myself, when I'm teaching, I'm almost back in that mindset of, okay, I'm showing this to do this. Why am I doing this? And then making sure that the new people that are seeing this stuff, here's why we're doing all this stuff. And I was already doing that to some degree, but even going further because I'm in that mindset, and it's helped make me a better coach. Sort of just a side note. So
yeah, no, I agree. Those life experiences are some of the best teachers. And just, I don't know, like, I'm trying to be better about not making excuses, trying to find a solution to maybe a problem. If you can't exercise or do things, there's always some type of movement or something you can do. So that's helped me out in that capacity, because sometimes, especially with low back pain, there's a high incidence of depression with low back pain, because, man, it can impact you all day long, and you just can't be yourself in a lot of ways, can't be as active. So, man, I just kind of like modified and I adjusted, and you know, when I deal with people with injuries, I'm like, all right, let's see how we can get you to do the thing as close as possible, you know, and still keep you active and keep you, and that's the tricky part. And that's the fine line. That's why you have a coach, and, you know, a jiu-jitsu coach, a strength conditioning coach, whatever. Maybe I'm going out of town, I can't eat the way I want to eat, or I'm supposed to eat. Well, how can I modify it? Well, that's why you have a coach to help you through. So there's always a way to do it. May not be exactly how you want it, but, you know, compromise and kind of try to problem solve.
Yeah, and this is something that kind of segues into one of the ideas, is that you kind of want to be a stoic about it. Okay. When I mean stoic about it, let me be clear on this, because this originally was one of the emails for those of you that are in the Chew Crew list. And when I said this, someone sent me a message about it, and they were, you know, criticizing me, saying, listen, man, sometimes you got to get stuff out. You can't just bottle it up. And I told him, I was like, well, that's not what well, first off, it's not even what I wrote. So he
It's
didn't
not what
read what I
stoicism
put.
is.
Well,
Yeah.
right. He's like, well, it's sort of like, man, that's like, I told him, I was like, that's not what I wrote. That's a bad interpretation, because that's not what stoicism is, right?
Correct.
What I mean by this being a stoic about it is basically, once you identify whatever's troubling you, whatever has you anxious, nervous, worrying about that kind of thing, instead of looking at the situation as a complete negative, or something to be avoided, look at it as a chance to grow. Look at it as a chance to become better, as a new challenge to take on. After all, when we think about it, most of our growth has typically come off the back of something that was at the time inherently negative, right? It seemed like it was a negative thing. So, again, this can be a lot of different things. For instance, as a jiu-jitsu sort of parallel, or a jiu-jitsu sort of story to illustrate this, there was a famous guy named Gordo, was his nickname. And Gordo was a, jiu-jitsu guy back in the day, and he was in a motorcycle accident. His leg was really messed up. He couldn't use it very well, and it forced him to play half guard. At the time, half guard was not developed like it is now. If we said half guard now, we're like, oh yeah, half guard's a great position for sweeping. Yep. Back then, half guard was just considered half passed, right? Your guard was half passed. Well, he started figuring out how to work this position and sort of help develop a new trend for jiu-jitsu, and became it made him better, right? It sort of put him on the map for a position, and also made his jiu-jitsu better because he was using a position that worked for him. And I helped out a lot of people, including myself, by sort of helping tread ground with this thing. And that happened because he was in a motorcycle accident. He was put into a situation where he had to do something, he had to get better, and he did, right? And that's pretty cool. I know that I spoke about this a few times. Last year, I had a situation where I just had trouble sleeping. I don't know what was going on. There was some anxiety related to it, right? Because I got to the point where I remember, like, I was having trouble sleeping like almost every other night. It's like I would sleep for like 2 hours one night, and then the next night I would just crash and sleep for 8. And then it would just be this back and forth. And like every night, as soon as it would get dark, I would start worrying and thinking about, man, am I going to sleep tonight, or is it going to be one of the bad nights? You know what I mean? And you start thinking about it, which makes it worse. And I remember, I tried a lot of different stuff. And I remember probably where it started to make the turn was when I was like, I noticed I was always worrying about it. I was always thinking about it. And I remember thinking about it like, well, this is a chance for me to get better and to learn from it. I'm going through something difficult. And again, I'll gain some valuable information that then I can share with other people. But also something that'll probably make me a better person in the long run, because I'll have empathy towards stuff, and I'll also become better because I'll have to figure things out. It's a new challenge. And I remember once I took it on as that, where it wasn't something to be avoided, where, hey, if it's a bad night, whatever, bring it on, I'll deal with it. It was like I didn't have to control the situation, and instantly I felt a little bit better, and that helped out, and that sort of started off the issue, or the resolving of that, where now I don't have any trouble sleeping. I'm back to normal, 7 to 8 hours a night with no issues.
I think you gave into it a little bit. I think you tried not to control it.
You embrace it.
All right. Yeah, you embrace it. And it's like, all right, well, this is where we're at. Let's see what we can do. And but that makes sense. It's like, you have anxiety about the anxiety of not sleeping. It's like nothing's happened yet, but like you have a fear or anxiety about this potentially happening. And that's a vicious cycle, man. It's just like, it just feeds itself. And it's just one of those things when you can kind of not resign yourself, but kind of accept it and just say, all right, I'm embracing this challenge or this situation. Man, how much insight have you gained from that, and how much knowledge and how to kind of cope and deal with some of these challenging things? And now you're like, all right, I've been here before. I know what to do. It's just like you're kind of inoculating yourself to it a little bit. You're kind of deadening the stress of it.
Yeah. Well, think about, like, why do we worry about stuff? Why do we get anxious about stuff? It's a way to avoid, right? Because really what we're trying to do is we're trying to prepare ourselves for this thing so that we can hopefully think our way out of it to avoid it. Right. And that a lot of times creates more problems than it does help. Right. So again, that's the issue. So it's, again, by me thinking about it, oh man, is it going to be a good night or whatever? I'm trying to avoid having a sleepless night. Whereas if it's a sleepless night, and I'll talk about more in this a bit, it really wasn't that bad. We can deal with it. I'm perfectly capable of dealing with it. And so it's at that point that you just embrace it and say, you know what, if it is, come on, bring it. And if not, and that's an interesting thing where they've done studies on this, where people that worry, when something bad does happen, their baseline anxiety levels don't really raise that much because they're at such a constant level. Whereas if you don't worry, your anxiety does raise up when something bad happens, but at the same time, the rest of the time you're down at a reasonable, normal level, right? And so it's just something to kind of keep in mind with that whole situation.
Yeah, I'd say for me, as far as jiu-jitsu goes, I was talking to my wife about this yesterday. I was like, I love competing, but I hate competing. And I think the anxiety of not knowing the outcome, just the anxiety that I get working up to the event, up to the competition is very difficult for me. And that's one of those things that I think I need to work through. I need to compete more to kind of overcome that. I'm saying you're always going to have anxiety and some fear and stress, but that's healthy. There's a healthy part. There's like a healthy amount of it. You know, obviously you can have an adrenaline dump that's not healthy and you feel flat, versus use the anxiety to kind of, or that little stress of a tournament to kind of like boost you up and give your best performance. So, but you gotta, it's kind of riding that wave, man. It's hard to, I don't even say control. It's just hard to like sit with it and not let it overtake. So something to work on. Again, use it as a challenge.
So this kind of goes to something sort of that was neck. You were talking about inoculation, right?
Yeah.
You know, we think of inoculation, a vaccine, right? We take a vaccine to inoculate us to something to help, you know, fight against it. So there's an idea of flooding your mind. Now, this is something that I started doing back in the day because, again, just like you and just like everybody else, I used to be super, super nervous about competitions. In particular, the worst ones were MMA fights. When I was getting ready for MMA fight, that was nerve-wracking because, again, you would have to go through back into my life. But, you know, I had some traumas when I was younger where I got the literal crap beat out of me. And so as I was a young guy getting into MMA fight, only maybe 9 years removed from this event when I was a kid, I still wasn't over it, right? And I'm not really ever going to be over it. It's always going to be with me. But as far as like when it came to physical confrontations, it was something like my body was freaking the hell out.
Why did you want to do it? Why did you want to fight MMA after all that stuff? Like, why is it something that pulled you?
Because I think one is because like, I think when I look back on it, one was because when I wrestled and I was winning in wrestling, it was like I finally felt like I belonged. I found a place where I fit in, right? There was that. And so I wanted to continue that on. And for whatever reason, fighting seemed like this really cool thing. And I think a lot of young men have this kind of obsession with being warriors, right? This is something that's in us. Yeah. We want to be a warrior. And I think there was a deep sort of subconscious level of I wanted to learn how to fight and I wanted to be a fighter, because if I was a fighter, those people couldn't do that to me again. Right. And so again, my response from getting the crap beat out of me was not to like shy away, but was when I was offered the opportunity, it was like, I have to do this because, you know, if not, those people can do that to me again. Right. Whoever they might be. Whereas if I'm a strong fighter, I can protect myself. I can fight back. Right. That's not going to happen to me again. And so I think that there was a deep level of that. So I had to go through the situation, even though it was terrifying. I had to, because, you know, this is who I wanted to be. Right. And I think this is just sort of a random equation. I think about this is basically no matter what the situation is, if your desire outweighs the discomfort that is placed upon you to do the thing, you will do it. Right. Because I think of everything as like anytime we are making like an assessment as to whether or not we want to do something, it's always just it's a matter of discomfort, right? That it places on us. For instance, if you want to wake up a few minutes earlier because you want to read or you want to meditate, well, that places a level of discomfort on you, right?
Yeah.
If you want to go to a jiu-jitsu gym, it might cost a certain amount of money. That might place a discomfort on you based upon the things that you might have to sacrifice in order to go and pay for that, right? But at the end of the day, if the desire is more than the discomfort, you will do it. Right. And my desire to be the person that could fight, who could take care of himself, who wasn't going to get picked on or beat up by anybody was there. That outweighed any sort of fear that I had. And I was ready to walk into the cage. You know, I was ready to go do that stuff. But one of the things that like I started doing, and this originally came, I remember I was reading about like samurai, you know, so, and they would talk about that they would meditate on their death. Right. So this way that when they fought, they wouldn't be afraid of it. And there's actually a cognitive behavioral therapy sort of technique for this, which is basically flooding your mind with whatever it is that you think is the worst thing that's going to happen. So a lot of times when we get all antsy, nervous, anxious about whatever, maybe it's a competition and you're worried about losing. Maybe it's, you know, you think you're going to have a bad night of sleep. Maybe it's you think you're going to get ready to have a heart attack because something feels funny. Maybe you think your business is going to fall apart because of X, Y, or Z, whatever the thing is. You flood your mind with the worst possible thing that you can think of. And you just like related to the thing that you're talking about, right? Like just not thinking about terrible things, but related to the thing that bothers you. Think about that worst case scenario with that situation, and then do it over and over and over again. Like think about it. Think about it so much that it becomes boring, right? Because that's what's going to happen. It's like, okay, this isn't really that exciting. Because if you think about it just here and there, it's like a little shock to your system. But if you keep thinking about it, a very specific with mental imagery, not just casually thinking about it, you keep going over and over again, it becomes boring. And they've done these cool studies and these cool experiments where they have these people, they take people that are worried about something and they have them sometimes even repeat out loud the consequence or the thing that's bothering them, the things that's making them anxious. Or, you know, they have them get with really clear mental imagery, not just like a casual thought, but like very clear, defined. And they make them think about that thing straight for like 20 minutes with no break. And it gets to the point where they've seen it so much, it's no longer that interesting. It's no longer scary. And the idea is that basically it's like jiu-jitsu, right? In jiu-jitsu, what do? We put ourselves in uncomfortable situations and eventually we become very comfortable with those. So for instance, with competing, I started doing this thing where I would think about very clear. I'd sit down and think about what is it going to look like if I lost? What is that going to look like? And I've lost before. So I had very clear imagery as to what that looks like. And with MMA, I never lost, but I saw other people lose. So I could see what happened to them. And in reality, the situation wasn't that bad, right? I mean, if I lost, like nothing, not much changed. And so from that point, I was still anxious to compete because I was excited to be there. And you can look up a term called anxiety reappraisal, where basically you start to shift the way that you think about anxiety before a competition. Cause really it's anticipation for the competition, right? You're supposed to be amped up. It's going to be a big deal. But when you go out and compete, or at least for me, I wasn't worried about losing because it was like, well, if I lose, who cares? It's not a big deal. I already know it's not a big deal. I've lost before. And if I lose my MMA fight, well, it's okay. I've seen other guys lose their MMA fight. They're alive. They're here. Their wives still love them. Their friends are still their friends. It's all good. And so with that, what was cool about that is that if you're not hindered by the worry or the anxiousness that you were having, it opens up a lot of opportunities for you. You can move much more freely. Like with the competition, you can take chances and go for stuff. You're not worried about the what ifs. You're ready to just go after it. And outside of the mat, off the mats, you're not like hindered down by this pressure, this weight that's sitting on your shoulders constantly. Your mind can think more freely and you can do whatever you need to do. For instance, if you've got a business and you're worried about your business shutting down because of whatever it might be, you're not going to make good decisions. But if you're looking for opportunities to improve things and you have that, maybe that anticipation of maybe I need to get up and do something, right? I need to go and get after it. Well, that's okay. But you can use that to fuel a more productive situation rather than you just worrying about it and letting it scramble your brain.
Yeah. It's kind of like accepting the worst case scenario in some ways and just like, just being in it and feeling it. And then, you know, I think that does make sense. It's, it's a tough place to go. But I think that there's some, just knowing that's the worst possible outcome and like, all right, I've accepted the worst possible outcome. I'm at peace with it. I'm okay with it, whatever you want to say. I think that's, yeah, you can kind of like, well, what's the worst that can happen? I might lose jiu-jitsu tournament. All right, well, I'm still going to show up on Monday to train, and my coach is still going to be my coach, and people are still going to be in my corner, you know.
That's right.
I think, you know, with MMA, the risks are a lot higher. Obviously, the hurt you can get, you know, but you can also get very hurt in jiu-jitsu. Just accepting that, and
but I mean, like, but 99.9% of people, they're fine. And really, again, when it goes back to that worry, that anxiety is all about you trying to avoid the situation.
Yeah.
Right. And you're, you know, in a way you're thinking you're not good enough. You can't deal with it. But once you realize that whatever the situation comes, you're perfectly fine to deal with it. You have what it takes. Right. Then you're in a different place completely. If you know you have what it takes and you can take on whatever friggin' challenge comes your way, no matter what it is, it's like, then you're in a different place. And, you know, again, that's where it's no longer such a worry thing, because you're like, well, if I lose, okay, I'll deal with it.
Yeah.
If I have this unfortunate thing that happens to me, I'll deal with it.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
And that kind of goes to like the next one, which is, asking yourself the question, what can I do about it right now? Right. So, because sometimes there is productive worry, right? If there is a situation that's happening that calls for a certain amount of worry or anxiety to be associated with it, it can be productive, right? Because maybe something is happening that you can take action on right now and you can make something improve. Well, then you should be doing that. You should use whatever that is, whatever that urgency that's created from that situation, you should use it to make some change happen, right? That's a reasonable thing. But a lot of people's like anxiety that just sticks with them is unproductive. It's nothing they can make a change about. They can't do anything about it right now. And so that's really, you have to ask yourself that question. Okay, I'm having this, something's bothering me, X, Y, or Z. What can I do about it right now? If I can do something about it right now, then take action. And again, this goes back to the action idea. If you take action on something, the anxiety tends to go away, right? Because you're doing something. You're in the moment. You can't think because you're doing. But if you can't take action on it, because for instance, if you're worried that your business is going to fail, but it's not failing right now, or you're worried about some sort of ailment happening to you because you had a headache and now you think you have a brain tumor. Well, but your doctor said everything's fine, but you think that there is a misdiagnosis or something. You can't do anything about that. So just let that one go, right? I mean, like, again, you can't do a lot of stuff about things that a lot of times deep down we know is kind of irrational. So let it go, because there's no point in worrying about it. And just sort of realize, and just sort of separating those two can be helpful, because again, if we know we can take action for something, we can get after it, and we realize that there's nothing I can do about this right now, why bother even giving it its space to live in my brain?
Yeah, I think the way that I think about it is, what can I control and what can't I control? Like, what are the issues?
Sure.
What are the issues that are outside of my control? Like, if I'm going into a jiu-jitsu match, I don't control what my opponent does. I can control my game plan and what I do, and with the takedowns I go for and the grips that I try to fight for. And that's kind of one of the things that's over the years been one of the most helpful things for me just in life in general. And like, what can I do? Are these things that I can control? And if I can't control them, I have to let them go. I have to just be, let them play out. But what can I control? Maybe, focusing on this or drilling or whatever it is, if it's jiu-jitsu related. But in life too, it's kind of one of those things. It's like, well, I can make sure if I'm running a business, I take care of my clients and my patients, and making sure, it's a great experience for them. I can't control whether they come back or not, or if they want to, continue to use my services, whatever that is, whatever type of business you have. But I can control the experience I give them and allow them to, hopefully come back and be successful in my business. So that's kind of, I guess, like, I've heard somebody say, and I use this term, gravity issues. Like, gravity, you can't control gravity.
Yeah.
The way gravity is, it's like, so I call them like things that are out of my control. I call them gravity issues. Like, that's a gravity issue. There's nothing I can do about that. That gravity's going to pull on that. It's going to make that thing do what it's going to do. And there's nothing in my power. But so that's the way I think of it. But that's a great way, like, you think of what can I do about it? I think about what can't I do about it? Like, I can't do these certain things. So those are out of my hands. And that brings me a little bit of calm.
Sure. Well, and that's like, I remember when I started teaching classes when I was younger, I would have a certain bit of worry or anxiety or nervousness about, what are these people thinking about these techniques that I'm showing them, or the class that I just ran, was it a good class? Did they enjoy it? I don't know. There was this thought process. And then I remember I got to the point where I was like, look, all I can do is give them the best that I have at the time, right? Because that can always change day to day. But I give them the best that I have right now. That's all I can give them, and I just lay it out there for that. Then that's it. I'll give you my best, and if that's good enough, great. If it's not, then hey, it's okay. I understand. But that was the best I had that day. Right. And with competitions, you're exactly right. When you go in there, you can control the techniques that you're going to execute on a person. You can't control anything else. You can't control the ref. You can't control the fact that your match was 10 minutes later than it was supposed to be, that they changed your opponent, they moved the mat. You can't change the fact that, the opponent was in better shape than you, or, had a really good triangle. There's a lot of things you can't control. So why bother? And so, as you said, chalk them up to gravity issues. So the next thing is hobbies. And so Obviously, jiu-jitsu is a hobby, and that can be a useful
Yeah.
thing. But, you know, every now and then when my mind is scrambled, I know it's unproductive worry, right? I know it's like it's not useful. This is not something. These are gravity issues that I can't do
Yep.
anything about. I obviously jujitsu's a good exercise for me, but sometimes it's, you know, it's 12 o'clock at night. I can't go train jujitsu all the time, and you know, maybe I could go work out, but also I might be kind of tired. I'll typically do something that I find almost kind of mind numbing. I'll do a couple things. Number one is I read every night, but if it's a night where I am particularly like my mind's a little frazzled, I'll try to read something that has like a story, like I've got several books that are like short stories and things like that, collections of short stories, science fiction or like fantasy type stuff that's like, you know, it's just fun to read, right? Like I'm not getting any long-term benefit other than it's relaxing and it's an enjoyable read, right? Or I'll play video games. I don't play video games a lot, but I'll play for like 30 to 60 minutes, and I'll play some very specific games because I don't like there's some games I can't get into anymore. Like if I was going to play when I was younger, I used to play like first person shooters, and I used to play a lot of strategy games like StarCraft 2, and some different real-time strategy games. Those are too fast paced. If I start playing those, it's like I'm wide awake.
Yeah.
Whereas yeah, I can play like you know, I can play like a more of like a role-playing game, or I can play some slower paced game. And when I play those, it's like, you know, 30 to 60 minutes, my mind gets basically numbed and I forget about the fact that I was worrying. And then after I'm done, I'm like, oh, I'm good. Like I'm not worrying anymore because my mind, I got some distance away from it. Right. Basically what it is I had a feeling of what it was like to not worry for an hour. And then once I was done not worrying for an hour, and I came back to the regular world and realized, oh, I didn't worry for a whole hour and nothing changed.
Yep.
So there's really no point in me worrying. And it gave me a visceral experience. And typically right afterwards, I can go to sleep. I know video games are not supposed to be good before sleep, and I don't do it every night. But on some nights when my mind's scrambled, that's what I'll do. I'll play some video games and get my mind to chill out, and then I'm good to go. And I'll go to sleep, and I sleep like a baby.
Yeah, I'll do the same thing just to distract myself. I'll do that. And then sometimes if I don't want to be on screens at night, I'll do a podcast, something like, you know, I'll listen to Joe Rogan from time to time. He's got somebody goofy, funny on that like is just doesn't require a lot of mental energy. It's just kind of hearing the conversations, and we'll talk about, you know, whatever aliens, something interesting, and it just kind of takes you out of that.
Yeah, a good movie does that too.
Yeah, a good movie. But if you want to, like you said, if you want to avoid maybe screens and those lights at night, try not to, like you said, you do a game that's more slower paced, nothing too super stimulating. That doesn't require a ton of thought. And I think that, yeah, it just gives you it's kind of numbing, something fun. And there's nothing wrong with that from time to time.
Right. And again, I know the screens are not great, but I think everything is like you got to compare. Well, what are you doing it with, right? We take medicine, which every medicine has some negative side to it, some side effect, right? Well, okay, well you're looking at a screen for a little bit. You can turn down your brightness. You can put on blue blockers, and you can put this like screen over your thing to help reduce blue light. But let's say you're looking at the blue light. What's going to be worse? Looking at blue light and maybe having slightly decreased quality of sleep, or staying up because you're so worried about this thing and you never actually go to sleep, right? Like we know there's one that's worse than the other, right? But you know, even thinking about this, having some sort of hobby in general that again, and this might be jiu-jitsu for you, and that's great. But you know, I think it's good to have like both physical and non-physical hobbies just to have things to like, depending on the situation that you find yourself in.
Yeah.
Have those things to chill yourself out. Like, so for instance, like there's I'm reading a biography on Churchill, and there's a point where he meets FDR, and this is during World War II, right? So they're in the middle of fighting the Germans and the Japanese and everything else. He goes in there to FDR's room, and FDR's playing around with his stamp collection, right? So you're like, okay, this guy who is, you know, the leader of the United States, dealing with a lot, right? I mean, you know, he's got a lot on his plate, and even in the midst of having that all on his plate, he's playing with a stamp collection in his room, right? it was his way of just de-stressing, right? Just relaxing a little bit. And there was even, I was reading about with Churchill. Churchill had all kinds of like little hobbies and things that he would do because obviously he was served in all these different things from the military to the government in Britain and everything else. But he would do everything from like laying brick. When he would be building something, laying brick, to painting and things. He had all these little like hobbies to just kind of take his mind off of whatever was going on, to get some distance from it. Yeah. And so I think that those are important. Sometimes like when you, especially when you're someone like me and where you have your own business and there's a lot on your weight, there's a lot on your plate, excuse me, and you have a lot of weight on your shoulders.
Yeah.
And especially if you own your own business, your mind can simply just be going all the time because there's so many opportunities to take advantage of. It's nice to have something to help just turn your brain off, so that this way you can come back to, regular life. You can turn your brain off. You can come back to your family. You can go back and chill out and all that stuff. So just an idea.
Off topic, was FDR the one that trained? Did he train which president like trained?
Theodore Roosevelt. That was his cousin. So Theodore Roosevelt was the one that had, he had
judo or something like that.
So so basically he had wrestled, if I'm correct, and there was judo was actually at the time was going around the world doing demonstrations, and they did a demonstration for him. And he actually there was the judoka that went against some like football player from Yale. And because the football player was so damn big, the guy had trouble throwing him. But, and, I think they had some other matches with catch wrestlers and stuff across the US, but it was Theodore Roosevelt. He was the one that was very obsessed with like, male, like masculinity and virility and being a strong man. Yeah. And so he was the one that, the Rough Riders, again, you look at these guys, and obviously for our time, when we look back at them, they seem a bit different. Like, you know what I mean? If you were to actually talk about them on their views of life, you'd be like, you're a little off, whatever. But I think they're super cool because you see a guy like Theodore Roosevelt, and he was from the upper crust of society. And he was willing to throw himself into the fray instead of saying, hey, we're going to send you guys to go fight these battles. He's like, no, me and my Yale buddies that played football, we're going to go down there and we're going to fight, right? Like, we're going to do this too. And I think there's something interesting about that. And he did a lot of cool stuff, but that's Theodore Roosevelt.
Cool. Yeah, I knew there's someone around that time frame.
So there's Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That's FDR. Yep. He's like the president we had during, the bulk of the Great Depression.
Yep.
Theodore Roosevelt was, 20 years before or whatever. So again, he was a cousin, an older cousin of his.
Interesting.
And so I just thought that was an interesting story. And then something that may be useful to you is also to start a worry journal. This is something, it sounds so silly, but if it's something that you deal with, right? If you're one of those people that gets like stuff like ruminating in your brain, you get worried, you get anxious about something that's going on. Again, a lot of us suffer from this stuff, right? Write it down. Writing it down has a couple of things. Number one is you can write it down and you can figure out whether or not it's, whether there's something you can do about it or if it's a gravity issue, right?
Yep.
But what's interesting about the journal is I did this for some years. Whenever something would bug me, whenever something got stuck in there, I would write it down and put it there. And what was interesting is that I have a journal now sitting over there that essentially has all these years of like, here was a worry, and not a single one of them came true, right? They were all overblown. At the very least, they were overblown. Right. Okay. Most of like 90% of the time, not even close to anything happened. Like the other 9% or 10%, whatever, it was just overblown. Right. Like maybe something did happen, but it wasn't nearly as bad as we expected. Right. And so a lot of times we put off doing stuff because we're worried we have some sense that it's going to be terrible. Oh, this bad thing's going to happen. And then when you do it, you're always typically surprised, man, it wasn't so bad. Like you talk to someone who does their competition, they do their first competition. They're nervous about it. They're all worked up, and then they do the competition and they might even lose, but they're done. And they're like, that wasn't that bad. Even though I lost, I still feel pretty happy with myself that I went out there and did it. And, I got some offense going. I got the sweep or whatever, or maybe I got smashed by the guy, whatever happened, but I'm okay. I'm fine. And so again, I think it's cool to have that because then you have this evidence that's sitting there that just reminds you, you can look at it and go, oh yeah, Like this thing, I was worried about this thing too, and it didn't happen. I'll give you a great example. In one of my journals back there, I have an entry, and this is when I was a young black belt. I have an entry where I was up against a guy from a very well-known team, a team where if I said their name, you would know who they are, right? And I saw the name and I was like, oh man, when I was looking, because the brackets were posted a couple days before, and I saw the bracket, I saw this guy's name, and I saw the team name. I didn't even know who this guy was. I just saw the team name, and I was instantly worked up because I'm thinking to myself, man, this guy comes from a really tough team, one of the best teams in the world. I'm just this, random guy in the middle of Kentucky. I don't know, man. Instantly this stuff's going through my mind. And so I wrote a journal entry about it. I was like, I'm getting ready to go from this guy from this team, and I'm just talking about what's going through my mind.
Yeah.
The next journal entry that I wrote the very next day was I won my match against that guy in less than 2 minutes or whatever it was, and I won the tournament that day. And so it's just a reminder to me, right? I've been in these situations before. I've been nervous before. It's completely normal. Most of the time when I go through these situations, even if this person is from a good team, most of the time I do fine anyway, so it's just kind of it's a useful practice to have when you're dealing with some stuff, if you're one of those people that deals with this kind of thing.
Yeah, I definitely have not been as consistent with it, but it's definitely something that I've done quite a bit in the past, is just getting that stuff out. You get it out in some capacity. For me, it's just to get it out of me. Number one, just to write it down. So I'll just kind of write what's on my mind. So, but I think the interesting thing that you said is go back and reading it and looking at it and seeing maybe, okay, this, because when you reread it, it almost can sound a little silly. It's like, oh, this is what I was worried about. Like, well, that's insane, or that doesn't make any sense, or whatever. You kind of have a little bit better or a different perspective of it, because you're not, finally you get it out of your head. And I think for me, like just writing it down, the act of even writing it down and doing something with that information in my mind, I think really is helpful. And I think there's something therapeutic about it in some ways.
For sure. I think that's right. You can get it out of your brain, give it a place to sleep. Basically, you sleep over here on this piece of paper instead of my brain. And then, from there, if you're dealing with something similar, you can always look back on it and say, oh yeah, I was worried about this before, but nothing happened. Right. So let's, we don't have to worry about it.
I don't know if this is a great example. If you're a Harry Potter fan, like they have the pensive or whatever, you pull like the little memory out or whatever.
There you go.
And you
pull that memory out and sit it somewhere else.
Yep. Yeah. I don't know if that's exactly it, but for all you Harry Potter nerds out there.
And then the last one, guys, is basically looking to the past. So, if you've overcome any challenge in your life, most of us have, everybody has in some way, right? Then you have evidence to back up the fact that you have what it takes to deal with difficult things that may come your way. At some point, you've had some bad stuff happen to you. And when you did, you took care of business somehow. Even if things fell apart completely, you were probably fine. And you use this evidence as a reminder, that you're more capable than sometimes you may even think you are. So for instance, going back to that match I just spoke about, I didn't, I know that I'm good, right? And so I put myself in the situation, but sometimes when in those positions, I didn't necessarily believe in myself. I wasn't going into that match thinking I was just going to win this thing. I had trained really hard. I knew I had what it took, but I'm throwing myself into the situation and let's see what happens. And then, there's so many stories of people where their businesses have failed. They've hit, bankruptcies and stuff like that. And then they come back and they do great. Right. And so again, no matter what's going to come your way, I mean, you'll be able to deal with it. Now, again, there are certain things like illnesses that can come your way that can take you out.
Yeah.
But again, everybody's got to go. Nobody gets to stay here. So again, at the end of the day, even the Stoics even talk about this, right? Even no matter what, like you can't let something destroy your character. Even if something bad does come your way and this is it, like this is no more. There's still things that you can do before it's all said and done to wrap this thing up in a way that you would like it to be. I think about that. Like, if things do go that way and if there are things that go down, what can I do? What can I do to make this existence that I had finish in a way that I would like it to finish? Maybe a morbid thought, but when you look at it, there's a chance to do something in any situation, so.
Yeah, I think just looking to, like you said, looking to the past. Well, I've dealt with difficult things before. I've overcome those things. I'll be able to do it again. Or I've competed before. Everything turned out fine. I've got this new tournament or a new competition. It'll
You've
probably
also
be fine.
competed and you've lost, and then you went and competed like a couple weeks later and you
You
won,
won. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And
So,
sometimes, yeah, it's just one of those things like I've been there, I've had the worst outcome. I was okay. I've come back from it.
right.
Um, and that's good. That's just life experience. I think those losses and difficult things, obviously they're challenging to get through, but once you get through them, there's definitely a reward there. The achievement of working through something super tough. And maybe it's a grueling training session or a tough tournament or a tough competition or whatever, or a tough life event. We've all gone through some, in our lives, some traumatic and difficult things. But if you use those as experiences to kind of build off of and just show that you are, at least prove to yourself that you have some resilience in there. We all do. We have a
Yeah.
lot. We're resilient. Like I always look at kids, like my
Mhm.
kids, like
Yeah.
it's going to be a really tough thing to go through, or this is a life event.
Mhm.
Man, little kids are like super resilient. And it's just like, I want to be more like my kids. It's like, they're so much more resilient. I feel like in some ways it's just, they overcome difficult situations a little more easily than I think
Mm.
us adults do. And it's something we can learn from them, I guess.
Yeah, and again, I think it's also like a certain level of practice goes with it, because, the more you overcome difficult stuff, it's empowering, right?
Yeah.
Whatever difficult
Yeah, for
situations come
sure.
your way, the more you overcome it, the more you're like, "Oh man, I got this. I got this," right? So like again, going back to this idea of anxiety and worry and everything else, the whole point of it is just a mechanism to try to avoid the situation, right? But when you don't avoid it and you go towards it in whatever form that you choose, you get the power from it. You know, think about how many people are nervous to go to train jiu-jitsu. There's a lot of people. I get
Yeah.
messages from people that are like scared to go train, and then they go train. They're like, God, I love this. This is awesome. I wish I would have done this sooner. You think about people that are scared to do just a lot of different things that they want to do, that they want to do. That's the big distinction. It's not something
Correct.
that you should do. It's like you there's something you really, really want to do, but you don't do it because you're nervous. But
Yeah.
then the more that you do those things, the more that you realize that you can deal with it. You have what it takes, that no problem. Like, I mean, even like we can get overwhelmed by certain things, like I've seen my wife get overwhelmed with certain things before, and she didn't think that she could deal with it. And then she's doing it, and then she's doing just fine. And it's like, you had this all along. It was
Sure.
always in you. You just had to realize it for yourself.
Yep. And it's, go into a couple other things, maybe a couple of bonus ideas
Okay.
that you actually talked about. One is like you talked about supplements and maybe diet. Think
Mhm.
about supplements and diet, right? Well, look at your caffeine. What's your caffeine intake?
Oh
That's going to
man.
ramp you up and that can
Yeah.
really screw with your anxiety, right? So look at your caffeine, look at your supplements, and look at your diet. Don't eat a bunch of shitty food. Like eat, whole foods. Try to eat less processed foods. It could be common sense. I'm not saying you have to go get on some kind of crazy diet. Doesn't mean that you need that, but like, hey, you have a little more energy throughout the day. You have a little more capacity to deal with difficult situations. If you're not as fatigued, if you're eating shitty food, then you're going to get exhausted. Get your sleep, right? If you're able
Mhm.
to sleep, get your sleep. That helps anxiety as well. Um, those are just some ideas that, like, I think that and having a supportive community, right?
Mhm.
Having a support, like whether your community is jujitsu, whether your community is your family or um, some type of church or religion that you
Sure.
find, comfort in, or a significant other, or partner, wife, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, kids. I think having those type of things, having people to talk to and share those moments with, can definitely be a huge part in dealing with your anxiety. I'm not saying you want to, just like put all your anxiety on them. But and the other thing is having, even like, people don't think about this, like having a talk therapist that they
Mm.
see. Like that's something my wife and I have done for a long time. It's been a really beneficial thing for me because it's someone that I always use the example of, like, if I have a heart problem, I'm going to go to a cardiologist. If I have
Mhm.
something else going on with my back, I'm going to go to a surgeon or a neurosurgeon or whatever. It's one of those things, you have a specialist that can kind of give you tools and give you ways to kind of work through those things.
Yeah.
Um, But those are just some ideas in my head outside of kind of what we talked about. That some people need. Some people may benefit. Not everybody will or requires those things, but just having the more amount of tools that you have in your toolbox, the better.
Well, and there was, I need to start writing these things down because I'll read these snippets and then I'll see that, it's a study and then I don't say, I need to save them. But there was a study that they did on people and they were doing these like, essentially they were measuring these people for essentially their entire life. And like in seeing how old they got, what kind of quality of life they had, all these different measures. I believe it's still going on, and they're like doing like, they're like on the third generation of researchers researching these same people. And one of the things that they were noticing is that the people that were basically living the longest were the people that had like the most rich human connections. Right. So the people that were very isolated, that didn't have very strong connections to a community and everything else, typically didn't have the best like health markers. They didn't live as long, right? All this stuff. And then the people that did have healthy, strong connections to community, to family, these sorts of things, people that they felt like they were in a part of something, had healthy relationships with their spouses, right? They typically did the best. Yeah. They lived the longer, they had better health markers, all this stuff. And so, again, we're humans and we're meant to see each other. Right now we're doing this digitally because I'm a little under the weather, but there's something about being in person, and again, at least for me, all you have to do is look back to like 2020. And, most of us, even if it wasn't very long compared to other people, because I know in some places they were more strict and other people were more strict due to circumstances than others. But, even like me, where, me and you would see each other every week doing the podcast. And then I would see a couple people at the gym lifting weights. But otherwise, I didn't really see my normal people. And then I remember when we came back about a month later after everything had started and started training again and seeing people, it was like, God, I didn't realize how much I missed just being around people, especially because we were all cooped up in the house and there was a lot of like political turmoil going on. And then when we're back in the gym training, I'm looking at everybody. And again, I know that we're all from different places, different walks of life, different socioeconomic positions, different races, religions, the whole deal. And we're all like just cool doing this thing. And it was good to be around, my people. This is what I consider that. It's like I don't really care much about any of your political beliefs or anything else. If you're a grappler and you're cool and you're a decent person, you're my people. And so it's good to be around my people. You realize how important those connections are.
Yeah. Well, community and also purpose, having some type of purpose in your life, whether like some people, there was a study, I think, that like, having like a job or a purpose, like there was a study of, I think these were like construction workers that like worked, like, I mean, those people work their bodies to the bone. I mean, they really just beat their bodies up physically. And they said, like, I don't remember the study, this was from years ago, but like once they hit retirement, they only like pulled their retirement for like less than a year on average because they end up dying. Which is crazy, right? It's like maybe they didn't have purpose or didn't have, I don't know. It's just something to do and interest you and invigorate you and get you up in the morning. I can see that. A little bit kind of off topic, but you have this like drive, like, oh, I got to go and do this thing. People are expecting and they're, I'm needed here. And that gives you purpose. And I think that not having purpose can lead to that anxiety and depression and kind of feeling shitty. And the other thing, look at like grandparents. There was a study that said like grandparents that actually spent a certain amount of time with their grandkids on a regular basis were less likely to get I think Alzheimer's.
Okay.
And certain other conditions like I guess like the mentally debilitating or neurological conditions. Which I don't recall the study again, but I remember reading it. I was like, see, mom and dad, so you need to be watching my kids more.
That's right. Send it to say, hey guys, I need to have a date night with the missus.
That's right.
I'm trying to help you not get dementia.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, man, it's like have the community and having purpose. I think those things are huge. Feeling needed, right? Yeah. Like that's another thing. Feeling like you have a purpose and a need and a contribution to like society or community in some way.
It's interesting because about 2 weeks ago, my aunt we had a funeral service for her. She passed away.
Oh, I'm
And so
sorry,
about
man.
two, it's, it is what it is. She was, man, she was dealing with, um, she had like a lung transplant, and then she had
Oh,
all this cancer and stuff. It was rough,
wow.
but, and she wasn't a big woman anyway. And by the end of it, she was like 90 pounds.
Oh,
It's tiny. So, anyway, when we were at this service, I remember just walking around, and I noticed this. I originally noticed this as a kid, and anytime I go to a cemetery, I always do this, and it's always been true. A lot of times when you go to a cemetery, you'll have the wife and the husband's cemetery, their gravestone or their plaque right next to each other, right?
mhm.
And you'll see that the dates that they lived, the dates that they passed.
Yep.
And one of the it's just an interesting thing. Probably about, at least for me, it seems like half the time, maybe more, when you look at the gravestones, when you look at the dates on them, their birth dates can be, can range, right? They could be really close, or they could be separated by, 8 or 10 years, whatever it might be. But when you look at the death dates, a lot of times you'll see that when one passes, it's like a 6 months, a year, 2 years, all of a sudden the other one passes,
Yeah.
right? And I notice it's just, I seen it, not always, right? It's not always
No,
the
of
case.
course not. Yeah.
But like I started showing it to Jess. I was just showing her, I was like, hey, I don't know if you ever noticed this. And like I started pointing them out, and she's like, oh my God, that's so crazy. Cause we're like, there was like one, it was like four, because it was like four grave like stone things in a row where like 1 year to 6 months apart, each of the spouses had passed. And again, I think that goes back to like your purpose, because a lot of us, I can't, I know it's for women and men, right? But at least from the male side, like, I kind of have probably a more traditional sort of upbringing and things like that. I hold door for women. And I like my position as trying to be the breadwinner if I can. Right. And
Sure.
so there's a strong purpose to take care of my wife and to provide for her, to protect her, to help her out, and to do that for anybody in the family. It's like, that's a position I like being in. And so, there's a purpose there. And I'm lucky enough to have the gym where I feel a certain level of purpose there, where I feel like I can do a lot of good with what we do at the gym. But I
Yep.
imagine just for anybody, like at the end of the day, like when you get old enough, it's like your family, right? Like, those are the people you're providing for. And if your wife is gone and you don't have kids stuff, that's like all of a sudden, like you said, you lose your purpose. And at that point, it probably, I don't know what that situation would be like, but it would be a difficult one. And so I think for a lot of people, like that, just like you said, purpose is a big one. We didn't really talk about that, and sort of off topic, but finding purpose is really important for whatever you're doing,
Mhm.
because it's a super critical thing, I think, for human happiness, right? It gives us meaning, and meaning is really important, because if it's like Nietzsche said, right? I'm paraphrasing here, but if you know your why, you can endure any how, or you can figure out the how, right? So like, whatever your purpose is, if you know what that is, you'll do whatever you need to do,
Correct.
right? And so just sort of rambling off topic there.
Yep. Yep.
All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed that podcast. If you are someone that struggles with that stuff mentally, then hopefully that gave you some ideas on how to tap out your anxiety, how to grapple your anxiety, your worry, your rumination into submission.
There you
Again,
go.
keep in mind that these are all just techniques. And again, as I said it earlier, you have to practice them. The more practice you have with them, the better off you get. Um, and we all have different things. And just like I said earlier, when you're on the mats and you tap out one partner, the timer goes off, you end up rolling with a different partner. Each partner is a little different. Some are bigger, some are smaller, some have guard games, some are top players. If you struggle with this kind of stuff, the things that are going to cause the rumination, the anxiety, the worry, whatever it is, it can change, right? It can adjust. And, it's interesting for a lot of us where, like for me, when 2020 happened, I wasn't even worried about my business a little bit, because I'd had too many things happen back in 2011. I was like,
Yeah.
I've got this, right? But then there's other things that bother me. And so we all have our own triggers. And so it's just something to keep in mind. And hopefully this helps you guys out with your jiu-jitsu training, obviously, but with anything else that's going on. Again, a lot of times I think that the podcasts and the videos and the emails that I write, of course, they sort of fuzzy the edges, so to speak. A lot of times we're talking about jiu-jitsu, but we start going into other realms a lot. So I'm sure it's probably nothing new for you guys. But anyway,
Hmm.
Hope you guys enjoyed the podcast, and big thanks to our sponsors for helping make this podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. It's one of the premier CBD companies that are out there right now. Something I've mentioned previously on the podcast is that they're third-party tested, meaning they have a company that is not affiliated with them going in, taking their bottle of CBD, taking their gummies, and actually verifying that what is on that label is actually what's in the bottle. So you can ensure, you can be, rest assured that you know actually what you're getting. And this is important because CBD is a unregulated product. The FDA does not regulate it. And so that means that, people could theoretically put all kinds of stuff in there that isn't what you want, again, and they've done studies on this. They've had people like independently test out multiple different types of CBD, and they found that in some cases the CBD products had too much of some substances, not enough of some substances, and in some cases substances that weren't even listed on the label, right? And so again, with supplements, I'm very big on getting quality supplements because again, this is the vehicle, right? My body, your body, it's your vehicle for life, and when that thing's running well, everything else sort of falls into place. And with supplements, if I'm going to use them, I'm going to get good stuff. And so again, if you want to try out CBD, they have both the regular CBD products and they also have THC-free products. So if you are someone that gets tested regularly, you can do your research on it, look on their website. They have a THC-free product. You can see if it's a right fit for you. But check them out. charlesweb.com is the website. The promo code is Chewjitsu20 for 20% off the order. Also, thanks to Epic Roll, rollbjj.com. I'm just putting this in your ear now, guys. Sometime in the near future, we'll be doing another round of Jiu-Jitsu gear, rash guards and shorts, that kind of thing. And I'll be having it done by Epic Roll. I like this stuff. I think he does a good quality rash guards, good quality shorts. I really, really like his shorts. They're very comfortable, but at the same time, they're still substantial enough that even after 3 years of abuse and regular use, the shorts that I got from him originally when I was doing the test run of the prototypes for the Jiu-Jitsu gear, they're still going great. So again, it's good quality stuff that's going to last you, which again, if we're going to pay the money for it, we want it to last us, right? And it's good stuff. And again, if you don't want to wait that long to check out some of his products, go to his website at epicrollbjj.com. The promo code is Jiu-Jitsu for 15% off. And again, you can save 15% off on a new gi, rash guards, shorts, t-shirts, and he's got a bunch of other products. Give him a look and check it out. Also, if you guys want to support the podcast directly and get access to our Patreon, you can do so by going to our website or our Patreon, patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Upon joining, you'll get access to a lot of different stuff. A couple key things. One is a seminar recording that I recorded back in the day showing some of my favorite techniques. Another one is a warm-up routine that Eugene put together for your mobility and inflexibility. Again, everybody in Jiu-Jitsu knows that, again, when you think about it, techniques are simply movements. And so the better your movement capacity is, the more, essentially, it's the more tools you have in the tool belt. If your mobility and movement is limited, then that limits the amount of techniques that you can engage with. And as someone who's not a ultra flexible person naturally, doing some of the stuff that Eugene has in the warm-up routine is very useful. It will help out your jiu-jitsu. And again, if you start using it and you like it, then great. Go from there. And if you don't, well, that's up to you. But the other thing that we have in there is we have a collection of snippets, short clips, short conversations with every single black belt that we've ever had on the podcast. And in those clippets, it's not even a word, in those clips, those video clips, audio clips, we have just real short conversations on actionable tips that you can use in your jiu-jitsu today. So again, just a clear idea of what's something that worked for you, what's something that could work for someone else, what's something that you would tell someone else if they were in this situation, that kind of stuff. And each one can give you something actionable. So again, you have a collection of hundreds of those. And so if you would like to get access to all that, plus additional resources that are in there, you can go to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast and check it out. And last but not least, if you would like to join my daily email and become part of the Chew Crew, you can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join, JOIN. Upon joining, you'll get access to 2 exclusive ebooks that I give away. One is, actually, there's 3 right now. The third one's not going to be there that much longer. I'll tell you what it is. But the first one is a game plan book on how to design your game plan for jiu-jitsu. The second one is how to break through sticky plateaus with your game. Like when you start hitting those training plateaus and your game just feels like it gets stuck, using drilling strategies to break through that. And again, I line it out so both if you're a coach and you'd like to implement some of them, you can do that. Or if you are a person who is, a regular hobbyist who doesn't have control of their training and only trains for a couple days a week, there are strategies in there for you as well. And then the last one is an at-home training book that also gives you some ideas on studying. I originally made it during the coronavirus times where people were, experiencing those long layoffs. And so I put it in there. So this way, if you were struggling and you had to stay home, you had to work out, you wanted to study jiu-jitsu, not lose all your progress type thing, I gave you some resources, workouts, and ideas to study jiu-jitsu from home. That's eventually going to be taken down because I'm going to fill that out and make it into a more substantial product and sell it later on with some additional resources. But if you want to get it free, you can right now, again, at my website at jiujitsu.net/join. JOIN. And so, guys, with that said, that's the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us this week, and we'll talk to you next time.